Thank you so much. Yeah, this is exciting. This is like a brand new talk that I produced like specifically for the symposium, so I'm excited. It's my first, I guess you could call it like a lecture performance inside of the game engine software. For the last year or so, I've been working kind of exclusively in this software and like specifically focusing my work on games, like video games, as these sort of affective interfaces for reckoning with and embracing complex forms of knowledge that maybe go beyond certain knowledge like structures or language hierarchies that we use in our day-to-day life. So yeah, this is a talk that's going to be looking at some of the Earth Engine research, which explores digital Earth twins and the like paradoxes of predictive tech in foreclosing many futures into one most likely future. And it's also looking at the like history and future of simulation in gaming, as well as the sort of double-edged sword of ecological simulation in game worlds. So it's basically a three-part talk that's going to be happening inside of the engine. So yeah, without further ado, I'll get started. How real is your world? How do you know? Maybe it's the gentle sway of leaves in the wind, or the sound of crickets chirping at dusk, or the softness of the light in the summer. Take a step back, blink, turn your head to the side. Are you sure? From the earliest 8-bit bush in The Legend of Zelda to the peat bog sublime of Death Stranding, video games have long been on a quest for perfect simulation. The benefits are obvious. More convincing worlds equals more immersive gameplay. More immersive gameplay equals more profit. From real-time weather systems to 3D scanned rainforests, an economy of simulated nature has emerged to answer gaming's demands. But is this desire for ecological simulation also a kind of capture? This talk explores how simulation in gaming carries echoes from the past, even as its implications careen towards the future. The same computing platforms powering next-generation immersive gaming are also fueling long-range climate forecasts and evaluating proposals to modify the Earth's atmosphere. In other words, the same climate simulator powering the real-time weather system of the next Grand Theft Auto is also going to tell us whether geoengineering is a good idea. Consider the real-time digital Earth models currently being assembled of the planet, also known as Earth virtualization engines. As the conceptual sibling of a natural history museum with all the related baggage, consider the implications of this archive that floats incandescently above us in the cloud. The energy funneled into its maintenance, ironically contributing to the slow death of the real thing. What new ways of relating to the world do simulation technologies open? And what do they inevitably foreclose? Still, there's something of value to gaming's affective dimensions. Think of the last time that you played a game for the first time, or watched somebody else play. Think about that out-of-body feeling of being spawned in a new environment where everything feels unfamiliar. Consider the humility that comes from knowing nothing, the openness that comes from being permeable. the slowness of learning the fundamentals. How to move, what's your name, what do you live for? Consider that inevitable moment in the game where the line between the player and character dissolves. You want what the character wants. They move as you move. Eventually, the player and the character will merge. We do this easily enough for playable characters. What if we also did this for the game's world? In order to answer these questions, we need to meet them in their context, inside the game engine. Part 1, 2 kinds of wind. In cinema, there is the wind that blows and the wind that is blown by a machine. In computer games, there is only one kind of wind. Harun Farokhi, Parallel 1. When the German artist and filmmaker Harun Farokhi transcended this mortal plane in 2014, he left behind one of the most prescient analyses of simulation in gaming. Across 4 acts, Parallel 1 to 4 analyzes the perpetual feedback loop between simulation and culture. His project explores how virtual environments map the present and predict the future, even while largely reinforcing historical ways of knowing the world. It is ironic that the video game industry, whose output is largely centered around violent and human-centric modes of play, has chosen environmental realism as its representational benchmark. Trees shuddering in the wind, clouds unfurling overhead, dappled sunlight on swaying leaves. These have long been the stress tests of computational photorealism. Video games must render their worlds in real time with each playthrough. Each frame you can see here is allotted roughly 1/5000th of a second to render out. As you can probably tell from the fan that's strapped to my overheating laptop, this requires an immense amount of computational muscle. As the software grows more powerful, the hardware must follow exponentially. Consider how the first supercomputer, the Cray 1 model, built from dairy pipes and hoses in Wisconsin in 1972, was considerably less powerful than the smartphone in your pocket. Consider Frontier, brought online in May 2022 in Tennessee, the most powerful supercomputer in the world, runs at a speed of 10 exaflops, which means it's capable of running 10 quintillion calculations per second. More real, more beautiful. With the arrival of titles like Sea of Thieves, The Legend of Zelda, The Breath of the Wild, and Firewatch in 2016, we edge ever closer to the ludic sublime. And yet, the technologies underpinning these worlds are streaked with violence. Tennis for Two, largely considered to be the first video game, was crafted with missile tracking technology by a group of bored physicists killing time in the lab. Space War, developed a decade later on the PDP-1 computer model, was funded by the Pentagon and later used in military training. And yet, a realistic landscape, because that is how game environments are termed, a choice of syntax that reinforces their status as secondary and inert, matters. The believability of a blade of grass or a body of water aggregates to reinforce what the game scholar Ian Bogost terms the magic circle, or the narrative immersion of a game. Hiroki's death predated the Cambrian explosion of simulated ecology in the late 20-teens, realized through 3D scan megamalls with thousands of free-to-use assets, as well as powerful photogrammetry applications, which allow anyone to make a 3D model of virtually anything. One wonders what the artist would think about a photorealistic tree trunk scanned in from Iceland that now appears simultaneously in a medieval RPG, a text-based adventure game about a park ranger on the run from his dying wife, and a post-human mycelium zombie survival game, amidst thousands of other titles. Never has photorealism in video games been so easy and, in a sense, unremarkable. The question then becomes, what else might simulated environments be capable of? Part 2, all the world's polygons. We live to capture this world to give life to countless others. We capture the world so that you can create your own. Quixel Advertising Campaign, 2018. There is a park 40 miles northwest of Los Angeles that looks Martian, as if plucked from some science fiction story. Gigantic primordial rocks thrust into the sky like cosmic daggers. Its cinematic otherworldliness is no stranger to Hollywood. The Vasquez Rocks State Park lies within the 30-mile studio zone of the industry, permitting cheap actor and crew day rates. As a result, dozens of iconic movies pre-CGI world building were filmed here. Over a century, this ancient landscape has simultaneously been Dr. Evil's underground complex in Austin Powers, the planet Vulcan in Star Wars, and, a little unconvincingly, Dracula's rural Transylvania. Hollywood's plug-and-play approach to the Vasquez rocks served as a precedent for its use in contemporary production, virtual production. As an increasingly integral tool of the industry's production pipelines, the game engine can be thought of as one huge stage set. Things are sculpted, painted, meticulously lit, and precisely filmed. There's a constant negotiation between the environmental complexity and render efficiency that determines how virtual worlds are made. This tension is crucial to how such engines have evolved over the years. In computer graphics, each 3D model is made up of polygons. These are flat surfaces composed of vertices. A higher poly model is more realistic, but it also requires more computational power to render, causing more lag. To combat this, game engines will only render out the polygons in each scene, adjusting their level of detail according to the distance from the camera, a technique known as billboarding. As the name implies, billboarding reinforces the understanding of virtual environments as mere backdrops against which the real action of the game world takes place. Wherever the gaze turns, reality sprouts. Curiously, this representational tactic has overlaps with medieval theories of vision, which philosophers believed to emanate outwards from human eyes, a concept known as emission theory. In a sense, this camera-centric computation of the game engine interface also mirrors the essentialist origins of ecosystem science. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a centralized technique for tracking and monitoring forest ecologies was introduced by the timber economy. This fiscal forestry only visualized value. Any parts of the ecosystem that were considered non-profitable, such as fauna, fungi, and other flora, were simply left out of the model, as if they didn't exist. But there is a poetic undertone to this hyper-efficient framework. It suggests that the virtual world is natively complex, that it will reveal itself in slivers, only when the player slows down and pays close enough attention. Despite the unprecedented efficiency, rendering is still a drag. Animating foliage takes time, and building biomes requires at least some sense of specialized knowledge. Companies like XFrog, excuse me. Wait a second. Sorry. Companies like XFrog were early response calls to this demand, offering a suite of hyper-realistic 3D natural assets that use AI to mimic ecological randomness. These platforms catered principally towards architectural designers who needed a believable, geolocationally accurate backdrop to cinch the deal on their speculative building projects. Clients included Frank Gehry and Zaha Hadid architects. XFrog offers all the world's polygons for the low price of $600. Customers can hone in on particular continental ecologies, such as Asia, Europe, and the Americas, at $200 each. Epic Games, the parent company of Unreal Engine, developed an ecological countermove in 2019. It bought Quixel, a company founded in Sweden in 2011. Quixel offers an ever-expanding ecological library of free-to-download 3D assets, scanned in by hand by its globe-trekking 250 employees. With a not-so-humble mission to scan in the whole world, Quixel is well on its way. Its offerings range from Boston ferns to horse manure, Cambodian ruins to chicken nuggets. All in all, that's over 16,000 textures, brushes, plants, man-made and natural objects, alongside photorealistic scans of entire real-world scenes. Occasionally, these goods are also packaged as collections. Off the peg, curated worlds for the taking. At the time of this talk, Quixel's current collections are Medieval Banquet, Roadside Construction, and Junkyard Volume 1. Like a cyber scavenger, I sift through the digital detritus of the junkyard, which, as its name hints, will eventually be replaced with a better, junkier edition. Scrolling past photorealistic, rusted axles, wall-mounted chains, and a filthy cluster of oil containers, my eye is drawn to the humble trash pile. Zooming in on the cluster of nondescript garbage, I catch flickers of an engineered story. A gummy paper with the word dentist scrawled on it. A sealed envelope, tantalizingly face side down, whose contents could be anything. I think about the kind of person who art directs these assets, positioning them just so, and then slowly scanning them in, immortalizing these worlds within worlds. Where do these objects come from? What kinds of stories will they scaffold? As dazzling as the concept, Quixel and predecessors like XFrog are ultimately finite world inventories. Particularly astute gamers will sometimes catch the same asset appearing in different titles, triggering what's known as an immersion break, when the player is violently ejected from the believability of the virtual world. Yet, with the rapid leaps being made in smartphone-based 3D scanning apps, and an increasing number of budding game designers scanning in real-world assets to personalize their games, it's possible that a whole Earth inventory comprising of millions of contributors' scans may soon come into existence in the near future. Teddy Bergsman, the founder of Quixel, sees it happening in the next 5 years. As dazzling as the concepts of a planet-sized inventory of high-fidelity natural assets may be, there is an irony to this digital doubling. Recalling the museological impulse to immortalize in glossy vitrines all the world's life, a desire fueled by colonialism, the invention of taxonomy in the 18th century, and the conceptualization of extinction in the 17th century. This ecological doubling feels inescapably like a memento mori to a planet in crisis. Dazzled by the lifelike indexes of these simulated ecology megamalls and the countless virtual worlds they scaffold, I am left with the darker implication of their capture. Does a perfect replica of all the world's polygons neutralize the desire to protect the real thing? Sorry, it shouldn't look like this. This is the consequence of being my guinea pigs, I guess. There we go. Part 3, second bodies and twin planets. For the second body, there is no stable boundary between one species and another. We're all in the same boat. The Second Body by Daisy Hildyard. What is the second body? Let's start with the first. It's fairly straightforward. It's the one you can semi-see in front of you right now when you look down at your hands or your legs. It's you, bounded. The second body is a little less easy to define. It's the flights you take, the food you consume, the clothes you buy, the miles you drive. And simultaneously, it's those actions acting upon a global shared body. You can think of these two bodies sort of like a pair of nested dolls, except they're wired up to each other. One body sensing and influencing the other in a perpetual cycle. No player versus landscape. No subject versus backdrop. No real separation at all. How to describe this feeling? The language we have at the moment is so weak, Hildyard suggests, frustrated by the apparent impossibility of iterating upon an idea that butts up against the edges of language itself. I want to start, she suggests, by talking about the whole world. It's planets all the way down. The second body hints at the idea of an interconnected biosphere that was earlier hypothesized by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis in their Gaia hypothesis, published in 1974. Contrast this with Earthrise, the first full image of the Earth taken from outer space, captured in 1968. Earthrise is often suggested to have triggered an awareness of the ecological codependency of the planet. Paradoxically, it also frames the Earth as a closed, bounded system that can be represented, mapped, and modeled in its entirety. With the concept sketch for a so-called digital Earth captured by a NASA astronaut hovering over the moon, it is no surprise that the term digital twin was also coined in-house at NASA in 2010. Digital twins are real-time virtual models of physical objects or systems. They are hardly a new achievement, although within the last couple of years, the technology is increasingly intersecting with everyday life. Airports use them to monitor passenger flow and security. Cities from Singapore to Los Angeles are increasingly integrating them into urban planning processes. Surgeons are using them on the operating table before making a first cut. But the concept of scaling up to an Earth-sized digital twin, including the planet's atmosphere and weather system, is a newer and more complicated endeavor. In March 2014, the American tech conglomerate NVIDIA, whose state-of-the-art graphics cards power the gaming industry, announced Earth 2, its very own digital twin of the Earth's climate system. Short-range forecasting will be used in gaming, generating real-time simulated weather that's synced to the player's local environment. In the long term, NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, positions the platform as a tool for more accurately predicting extreme weather events, as well as mitigating the effects of the climate crisis. However, NVIDIA is simultaneously pitching this technology to major fossil fuel companies in order to streamline extraction and increase profits. Of course, Earth 2 is hardly a standalone case. Dozens of digital Earths have entered the simulated fray. For more, better, faster modeling, including rival systems from NASA, the European Space Agency, Microsoft, and Cesium, whose 3D spatial map of the Earth you see here. In Berlin last summer, a group of more than 100 scientists from 93 institutions and research centers put together a proposal for an internationally stewarded collective of Earth virtualization engines, or EVEs. A network of digital Earth models stationed across the globe, EVEs would be an opportunity to open up the future of climate modeling to a broader public. In addition to making the future impact of climate change more palpable to a general audience, this open sourceification of climate modeling would help to fill the industry's massive data gap over global majority countries. Speaking to a climate scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Wyoming this past July, I learned of the darker implications of model bias. In the arid plains of Cheyenne, Wyoming, sandwiched between a Microsoft data center and a Bitcoin mining farm, the supercomputer Derecho pumps out 20 quadrillion calculations a second. Its main modeling goal is to simulate a future Earth's climate under various forms of solar geoengineering, including spraying sulfur dioxide particles into the stratosphere to block out the sun. However, during my tour of the facilities, I am told that these $35 million calculations may as well be useless. Here's the paradox of climate modeling. More accuracy begets more believability, but more specificity begets more inaccuracy. In evaluating the accuracy of future predictions, climate models are assessed on how well they simulate the past. But we are moving into a chaotic climate future that is behaving very differently from what we've seen before. Earth's climate is a chaotic pendulum, the climate scientist describes to me, with multiple systems acting upon each other simultaneously. Miscalculating the amount of sea ice in 1 square kilometer in the North Pole will have an exponential domino effect, scaling up to a wrongly predicted typhoon season in Taiwan. And we are currently so devoid of climate data from countries near the equator and the poles, countries that are the most susceptible to both the particle drift caused by stratospheric aerosol injection and climate change more broadly, that it threatens to throw the viability of these climate models off the charts completely. This data void is a powerful reminder of the second body, this vital point of interconnection between worlds. Towards the end of the second body, Hildyard, whose house has just flooded, totally wrecked by a freak storm, an increasingly common occurrence, is speaking to an evolutionary biologist, Paul. Paul explains how the notion of the individual bounded body is non-existent in the colonies of bacteria that he creates. Once they hit a certain population count, the bacteria willingly atrophy their own genetic code, reducing their functionality to only a single task. No longer being able to function as individuals, these bacteria instead opt to become a collective. Here, symbiosis is the only form of survival. Could it be the same for Earth 1 and Earth 2? Perhaps in resisting this fetish for bigger, faster, more accurate models, this fantasy of calculating a single future for the planet, it would be better to instead zoom in on the map, to let things get fuzzy and indeterminate. A virtual Earth that rejects the self-contained fantasy of a digital twin could become an elastic bridge between the first and second body. Using these systems to envision multiple possible futures and embracing the parts that are chaotic and unknown could yield a new way of sensing our world. To emphasize this point, it may be helpful for us to finally return to the affective dimensions of the game environment. To be spawned here is to slow down. To move through this world is to pay close attention to all the ways that it behaves, changes, and evolves unpredictably over time. Like crossing back over the magic circle of a roleplay, there is a valuable bleed between game worlds and world. We have to choose what habits, what forms of knowledge, and what kinds of worlds we want to bring back over to the other side. Thank you.